Today we are going to discuss how Indian Constitution got developed. What is the constitutional history? What is the constitutional history? The Britishers came to India as traders. They came to India as traders, attracted by the stories of fabulous wealth. Attracted by the stories of fabulous wealth and fortified by the adventurous maritime activities. They got attracted that India had a lot of wealth. In temples itself, lot of wealth is hidden in India, and they also have fortification, very strong fortification about adventurous maritime activities. Adventurous maritime activities. They wanted to trade with the East. They wanted to trade with the East. They went to the Queen Elizabeth and asked permission. They went to the Queen and asked permission. The Queen asked them. The Queen asked them to form a company. To form a company. And East India Company was formed to trade with the East. East India Company was formed to trade with the East. At the outset, you have to remember that East India Company is formed by Englishmen. The directors and shareholders of the company, they don't everyone come and stay in India. They won't come and stay in India. They will have company servants who will come and stay in India. The formation of the company has happened in that period. Okay. So the company was formed and they went to the Queen Elizabeth again. The British Queen gave permission. Gave permission to trade with the East. To trade with the East. Here, East India Company got monopoly to trade with the East. East India Company got monopoly to trade with the East. The monopoly is exclusively East India Company have the right. Monopoly means exclusively East India Company have the right to trade with the East. And the permission is first granted for 15 years. The permission is first granted for 15 years only. Terminable with 2 years notice. Terminable with 2 years notice. So it is not forever. It is not forever. The permission is granted. The permission is granted in the beginning for 2 years, 15 years, terminable with 2 years notice. The permission is granted for 15 years, terminable with 2 years notice. Either side can terminate. Either side can terminate. After getting this permission to trade with the East, after getting permission to trade with the East, William Hawkins have come to India. William Hawkins have come to India. But he is not that successful in his convincing capacity, and Jahangir was so very adamant at that time. And then came Thomas Roy. He was successful in getting the permission. But in 1612, it is Surat where the first settlement of British have come into existence. It is Surat where the first settlement of Britain have come into existence. And then in many places, including Hariharapur in Mahanadi Delta, constitutional expert Ilbert told, the Charter of 1600 is the germ out of which the Anglo-Indian codes were ultimately developed. The Charter of 1600 is the germ out of which the Anglo-Indian codes were ultimately developed. So it's a seed out of which the codes were developed. After this, Charles II. Who is Charles II? Do you remember Stuart dynasty in England? The student of John Locke. Charles II was a student of John Locke. He got Bombay as dowry from Portuguese princess. Bombay is considered as a wasteland and no man's land at that time, and even the prince is not ready to accept Bombay, but they have forcibly gave Bombay to him. So he got from Portuguese princess Bombay as dowry. And in Chennai, there are many stories behind Chennai. It was given by one Mr. Chennappa, or ruled by Chennappa, and which was given to Britishers, all those things. Chennai also came into the domain. And Calcutta, Bengal, 5 small villages it seems were purchased by Britishers. So Bombay, Madras and Calcutta have become the prime places of center later on. Have slowly become the prime places. So they used to rule their areas from these localities. So they are called chief places, and they are named as presidencies. Presidencies. They are named as presidencies. Bombay, Madras and Calcutta were named as presidencies. Each presidency will be ruled by a chief. That chief is called governor. Each presidency will be ruled by a chief. That chief is called governor. Each governor is independent. He has the power to deal with his own domain. Each governor is independent, and that governor has the power to rule in his own domain. So no governor is above other governor. Remember, in this situation, each governor of each presidency is independent. And things went on like this. In 1726, a Charter Act was passed. For the first time in Bombay, Madras and Calcutta. Mayor's courts were established. Small courts, C-O-U-R-T-S, courts were established. In 1726, small courts, Bombay, Madras and Calcutta, mayor's courts were established. You may get a prelims question also, not only in political science and polity. By which act mayor's courts were established? By Charter Act of 1726, mayors' courts were established. Not only that, by Charter Act of 1726, a major change have come. Generally, before 1726, any law, any regulation, any rule regarding East India Company, any law, any rule, any regulation regarding East India Company shall be approved, done only by, made and approved only by the directors sitting in England, who are sitting in England. So by the time it gets communicated, by the time they understand Indian circumstances, the situation was so delayed. In that scenario, those government servants, British government servants, who are sitting in India are well acquainted with Indian conditions. They are empowered to make rules, regulations, bylaws. They are empowered to make rules, regulations and bylaws for the good governance of the company. But these rules, regulations and bylaws, which are made for the good governance of the company, should not be in contravention with the laws of England. They should not be in contravention with the laws of England. They should be in accordance with the laws of England. And these rules, regulations and bylaws will not come into force. These rules, regulations and bylaws will not come into force unless they are approved by the directors sitting in England. These rules, regulations and bylaws will not come into force unless they are approved by the directors sitting in England. So this is what the Charter Act of 1726 made the difference. The Charter Act of 1726, it has completely made the difference. Okay. After this act, events of great significance happened in India. The last strong ruler, Aurangzeb, have died. The later Mughals are very weak. They are very weak. Instability emerged. Many small empires started showing their prowess. In such a scenario, two great significant events happened, which you will read in history. One is Battle of Plassey, next is Battle of Buxar. Battle of Plassey and Battle of Buxar. Battle of Plassey in 1757, Battle of Buxar in 1764. In Battle of Plassey, British troops defeated Siraj-ud-Dawla and his French allies and his French friends. In at the end of Battle of Buxar happened in 1764. In 1765, the Bengal king Shah Alam, the Shah Alam of Mughal Empire, who has control over all the things, gave Diwani rights to Shah Alam to the Mughal Emperor at that time, gave Diwani rights to Britishers, East India Company, Diwani rights to East India Company. See, granting of Diwani rights in 1765. Granting of Diwani rights in 1765 is a watershed in the East India Company's administration. Granting of Diwani rights in 1765 is a watershed in East India Company's administration. At this time, the company almost openly removed the mask of commercial activity. Till that time, it has showed that it is doing only commercial activity. At this time, the company openly removed the garb of commercial activity and showed its real color, the color of political ambition. Though it has political ambitions, but till that time it has only a commercial entity. Till that time it is only a commercial entity. But slowly it has removed that commercial entity attitude and showed the real picture of political motive after Diwani rights. Okay. So at this juncture, Bengal, Bihar and Orissa came under the control of East India Company. Bengal, Bihar and Orissa came under the control of East India Company. హలో ఏంటి క్లాస్ చెప్తున్నాను, వీడియో రికార్డ్ అవుతుంది, మళ్ళీ చెప్తాను. Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. In such a scenario, Diwani rights were granted. And Bengal, Bihar and Orissa are not small territories. Don't consider the modern Bengal, modern Bihar and modern Orissa. It's something almost the major part of India. And British official system, their officials, their collection system is very weak at that time. So what they have done, they started employing Indian officials. They started employing Indian officials as their assistants. And with this Diwani rights, the East India Company servants started taking lot of corruption, lot of gifts from the villages. They used to remit taxes when somebody gives bribe. So they never bothered about the company, because company's directors, most of them are sitting in England, and company servants are working in India. They don't have direct contacts, and company's directors got a smell. Something is mischief there. Something is going on wrong. There's a very famous constitutional expert called Lecky, L-E-C-K-Y. Lecky told, never before the natives experienced such a tyranny. Never before the natives experienced such a tyranny. Once a troop of British men come to any village, the villages were abandoned, deserted, shops were shut, the doors were closed. People ran away from the place as panic-stricken fugitives. People ran away from the place as panic-stricken fugitives. Such was the condition. Such was the exploitation. Foreign rule is not new to India. Foreign rule is not new to India. India has lot of foreign occupations, but no one has shown such a tyranny. Earlier Mughals came, but they have come to India. They have used Indian wealth in India. They have made the people to believe that Mughals are the part of Indian culture. But British has never shown that they are the part of India. Their only ambition is exploitation. Their only ambition is exploitation. This was the scenario. So in this scenario, for the first time, British Parliament have sent a secret committee, appointed a secret committee to discuss about to deal about the issues of East India Company and to give a secret report. The committee gave a secret report which tells all the problems of the company. On the one side, East India Company is going bankrupt. On the other side, company servants are growing rich. On the one side, East India Company is going to bankrupt. It is in the bankruptcy stage. On the other side, company servants are becoming rich. At the same time, East India Company's products have lost its value. Its trade have lost its strength. Even in America, it is facing the problem. In such a situation, British Parliament thought to regulate the affairs of the company. British Parliament thought to regulate the affairs of the company. So, Regulating Act 1773 was passed. In this juncture, Regulating Act 1773 was passed. So, why did Regulating Act 1773 was passed might be your prelims question or mains question or even political science question. In any subject, from this act onwards, the entire story is very, very important. The entire story of how the system have emerged, what regulations the British government have made, the entire story is very important with Regulating Act 1773. Listen. As I told you, there are three presidencies. As I told you, there are three presidencies: Bombay, Madras and Calcutta. And also we have discussed that each presidency have its own governor and each governor is independent. Each presidency has its own governor and each governor is independent. And for the first time, the governor of Bengal is named as Governor General of Bengal. For the first time, the governor of Bengal is named as Governor General of Bengal. He was asked to supervise the other presidencies. Now presidencies are not independent, they will come under the supremacy of Governor General of Bengal. Warren Hastings is the first governor of Bengal who was named as Governor General of Bengal. Warren Hastings is the the first person who is the governor of Bengal who was named as Governor General of Bengal by Regulating Act of 1773. And second aspect, by Regulating Act of 1773, a Supreme Court was established at Calcutta. By Regulating Act of 1773, a Supreme Court was established at Calcutta. By Regulating Act of 1773, there was a change in the home government, the composition of the company and the entire setup of the company. The composition of the company and the entire setup of the company. Okay. Earlier, a shareholder who holds 500 pound sterling of share. Earlier in the company, a shareholder who holds 500 pound sterling of the share can elect the director. Now it was increased to 1,000 pound sterling. Earlier, if I have a share of 500 pound sterling, I am eligible to elect the director. Now it was increased to 1,000 pound sterling. Earlier, they were elected annually. Annual elections and annual system will not lead to continuity. So election period was increased. The tenure of the director is 4 years now. Earlier it is 1 year, now it is 4 years. So many changes were made in the composition of the company, East India Company. So voting right 500, now it is 1,000. Earlier 1 year director's period, now it is 4 years. So things changed. And many issues were settled. And the Act empowered Governor General. Who is Governor General? Warren Hastings. Warren Hastings to have many powers to make rules, ordinances, bylaws for the effective functioning of East India Company. To make rules, regulations and bylaws for the effective functioning of the company. This is Regulating Act of 1773. For the first time, British Parliament interfered completely into the affairs of the East India Company. After this, you have Act of Settlement 1781, not that important for exam. Act of Settlement 1781. The next most crucial act is Pitt's India Act 1784. Very important question. Pitt's India Act 1784. P8TTS. Pitt's India Act 1784. Pitt's India Act 1784 divided the functions of the company into two. Till that time, as I told you, East India Company have both ambitions, commercial ambitions, political ambitions. But both were be taken care of single administration. Both ambitions were taken care by single administration. For the first time, commercial functions and political functions of the company got separated. Commercial functions and political functions. You may get a prelims question. Commercial functions and political functions of East India Company got separated. Two different wings were formed. Board of Directors and Court of Directors and Board of Control. Court of Directors and Board of Control. Court of Directors, commercial functions. Board of Control, political functions. Two different wings were created. Court of Directors and Board of Control. Court of Directors is commercial functions, Board of Control is political functions. So Pitt's India Act 1784 started dual functions, Court of Directors and Board of Control. After Pitt's India Act 1784, you have Charter Act of 1813. Charter Act of 1813. Here you have to remember 3 points. Few points you have to remember. 1813, 1833, 1853. There are 3 Charter Acts. 1813, 1833, 1853. There are 3 Charter Acts for every 20 years. If you see 1813 to 1833, 1833 to 1853. Remember this. Charter Act of 1813, Charter Act of 1833, Charter Act of 1853. As we have discussed in the beginning of the class, British Queen granted monopoly of trade to East India Company to trade with the East. British Queen granted monopoly of trade to the East India Company to trade with the East. This monopoly of trade to the East India Company was taken away by 1813 Charter Act. This monopoly of the trade of East India Company was taken away by 1813 Charter Act. By 1813 Charter Act. Except in tea, except trade in tea and trade with China and some opium cultivation, rest all monopoly of the East India Company has been taken away. Next important aspect of Charter Act of 1813. Christian missionaries were allowed to propagate Christianity into India. Christian missionaries were allowed to propagate Christianity in India. Annually, at that time they thought Indians need to develop a proper education system to assist the British interest in India. To assist the British interest in India, we need to develop a proper education system for clerical education, all these things. Annually for the next 5 years, 1 lakh rupees is granted for the development of education in India. Annually for the next 5 years, 1 lakh rupees is granted for the development of education in India. 1813 Charter Act. This act regulated the company's profits, commercial profits and territorial revenues. This act also regulated the company's commercial profits and territorial revenues. Charter Act of 1813. These are the important changes that were made in Charter Act of 1813. And after Charter Act of 1813, the next Charter Act came after 20 years. The next Charter Act came after 20 years, that is 1833. After 1813, the next Charter Act came in 1833. Here, William Bentinck is the Governor General of Bengal at this time. In this Charter Act, Bengal was named as Governor General of India. From this Charter Act, the Governor General of Bengal was named as Governor General of India. The first person who was named as Governor General of Bengal was Warren Hastings. The first person who was named as the Governor General of India was William Bentinck. The first person who was named as Governor General of India was William Bentinck. Remember this point. According to Charter Act of 1833, William Bentinck was the first person to be named as Governor General of India. The act attempted for centralization of powers. The act attempted for centralization rather than decentralization. It wanted to centralize powers in Governor General of India. Attempted for centralization of powers. And the East India Company became purely administrative body. The East India Company became purely administrative body. No other things, from commercial to completely administrative body. So the East India Company was named as a purely administrative body by which Charter Act? Charter Act of 1833. The Charter Act of 1833. Okay. The Act also attempted to open competition for civil service exam, 1833. Open competition for civil services exam, 1833. Okay, next. Charter Act of 1853. After 20 years, next Charter Act, 1853. Charter Act of 1833 attempted for open competition. Charter Act of 1853 actually provided for open competition in civil services. Introduced open competition for civil services. Charter Act of 1853 introduced open competition for civil services. Not only that, Charter Act of 1853 is significant because for the first time separation of powers, separation of legislature from executive was mooted in Charter Act of 1853. Charter Act of 1853 for the first time introduced separation of powers. For the first time introduced separation of powers. Separation of powers means separation of legislature from executive. Till that time, executive functions, legislative functions are done by Governor General in Council. For the first time, legislative functions and executive functions are separated. Means the law making body and law executing body, separation of powers was the first time separated by Charter Act of 1853. Okay. After this, you all know the watershed movement in the modern Indian history, as we have discussed in the previous class. Revolt of 1857. Revolt of 1857. In this revolt, though the revolt went successfully for Great Britain, so though East India Company was successful in controlling the revolt, the British government understood it is no more prudent to leave the political administration in the hands of the East India Company. Now India is being ruled, should be ruled by the Queen directly. This is the idea that was mooted after 1857 revolt. So after 1857 revolt, to entirely overhaul the Indian administration, after 1857 revolt, to completely overhaul the administration, the Government of India Act 1858 was passed. In fact, Government of India Act 1858 was the direct result of 1857 revolt. Government of India Act 1858 was a direct result of 1857 revolt. Okay. So now East India Company now only for trading. Indian administration will be done directly by the Queen. India will be ruled from now onwards in the name of Her Majesty. India will be ruled from now onwards in the name of Her Majesty. She will be ruled through Viceroy. Through Viceroy and his council. Viceroy's council consists of 15 members. Viceroy's council. And the first person to be named as, first Governor General to be named as Viceroy was Lord Canning. Lord Canning is the first Governor General to be named as Viceroy. And the last Governor General officially namesake is Lord Canning, and officially was C. Rajgopalachari, Indian Governor General, and last British Governor General is Mountbatten. But from that now on, He is called Viceroy. From 1858 onwards, the Governor General is named as Viceroy, and the first Governor General in that sense is Lord Canning after 1857. Okay, that is 1858 onwards, Lord Canning. And Government of India is no more the authority from East India Company. Now it is going under the domain of British Queen. Okay, the act is made in the name of good governments in India. The act is meant for introducing good government in India. The act is meant for good government in India. And there was one more person called the Secretary of the State. Apart from Viceroy, you have one more person called the Secretary of the State to assist for all matters relating to the governance in India. There is one more cadre and post called Secretary of the State. See, Minto Morley, Viceroy and Secretary. Minto was a Viceroy, Morley was a Secretary. Montague Chelmsford. Chelmsford is a Viceroy and Montague is a Secretary. Like that, Viceroy Secretary post is being created. Okay, this is what happened in 1858 Government of India Act. 1858 Government of India Act. After this, you have Indian Councils Act 1861. Indian Councils Act 1861. Till this act, no Indian is allowed to enter into councils. No Indian is allowed. You may get a prelims question. For the first time, the element of Indian representation. For the first time, the element of Indian representation started in 1861. Indian Councils Act 1861. For the first time, the element of Indian representation started. For the first time, the element of Indian representation started. Indians were nominated. Who are these nominated people? Who are the stooges for British? Who listened to the British? Though they were the henchmen of British, but still an element of representation. An Indian is going to the council. Itself is a great task. Itself is a great task. So some of the Indians are nominated here. In the council, some of the Indians are nominated. For the first time, an element of representation started in Indian Councils Act 1861. The act introduced a grain of popular element in the councils. Some of the non-official members. See, official members means British. Non-official generally are Indians. Okay. And the Viceroy would nominate Indians to the Legislative Council. Who will nominate? The Viceroy would nominate. It is not election. It is nomination. It is not election. It is nomination. Okay. See, for example, Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala, Sir Dinakar Rao. Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala, Sir Dinakar Rao. All these people have become the members in the council. So they are all nominated members, not elected members. They are all completely nominated members, not elected members. This act also empowered. Presently we talk about ordinance. Today an ordinance was passed on bankruptcy insolvency code. So we'll talk about ordinance. This act empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances. Indian Councils Act 1861 empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances. Indian Councils Act 1861 empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances also. Okay. Then came Indian Councils Act 1892. Then we have Indian Councils Act 1892, which was a historic thing in the Indian constitutional history. Indian Councils Act 1892, it was historic in the entire constitutional history. What is this? What is the greatness about Councils Act 1892? See, I told you, Indian Councils Act 1861, an popular element of representation started. Indian Councils Act 1861, popular element of representation started. Whereas in the Indian Councils Act 1892, an element of election was started. First time an element of election was started in Indian Councils Act 1892. Though the election was indirect, though election was done only by Britishers, but still an element of election was started. And for the first time, questions can be asked in the council. For the first time in Indian Councils Act 1892, questions can be asked in the council, but supplementary questions are not allowed. Questions can be asked in the council, but supplementary questions are not allowed. Budget can be discussed, but should not be voted. Budget can be discussed, but should not be voted. Remember, an element of election, though very indirect, was started in Indian Councils Act 1892. An element of election, though very indirect, was started in 1892. Okay, budget can be discussed but cannot be voted. Questions can be asked but not supplementary questions. So an element of responsibility has introduced. An element of responsibility was introduced. Number of additional members in Imperial Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Councils was raised. The number of additional members in Imperial Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Councils were raised by Indian Councils Act 1892. It was also raised by Indian Councils Act 1892. So, Indian Councils Act 1892 is historic in many respects. The first thing is, it provided an element of election. It provided for an element of election. Then it also increased the strength of the councils, Imperial Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Council. Then it also discussed about questions but not supplementary questions. It allowed voting but not, budget can be discussed but budget cannot be voted. Budget can be discussed but budget cannot be voted. Clear? This is the thing. Next important watershed event. As you all know, 1905 Bengal division. Partition of Bengal 1905. Partition of Bengal 1905. And Lord Curzon's misadventures. In 1906, Muslim League was formed. In 1906, Muslim League was formed. From Dhaka, a group went to Lord Minto, called Shimla deputation, to ask for separate electorates, for Muslims. And British government thought it's the right time to further divide and rule India. It's the right time to further divide and rule India. 1909, Minto-Morley reforms came into existence. 1909, Minto-Morley reforms. Historic reforms, very important for mains. For prelims, you may get a question. Mains, you may get a question. GS 2 and also Indian government and politics, one question is expected in political science. Minto-Morley reforms 1909 are also called as Indian Councils Act 1909. Minto-Morley reforms 1909 also called as Indian Councils Act 1909. For the first time in India, separate electorates were given to Muslims. Minto-Morley reforms are very notorious, are very much in news in history. The reason is, separate electorates were given to Muslims. And as you all know, in India, till we get our constitution, till we have our constitution, there is no universal adult franchise. We used to have limited franchise. Limited franchise in the sense, only few people have the right to vote. Only few people have the right to vote. It was said that from every village, only a small bullock cart full of people. From every village, only a small bullock cart full of bullock cart used to go to polling booth, used to go and vote. That means not all people. Property restriction is there for voting. If you want to vote, you should possess some property. For Hindus, property restriction is introduced. More property they should possess. For Muslims, these property restrictions are little bit relaxed. For Muslims, even though they possess less property, they can vote. For Hindus, the property they should possess more. This also is done by Minto-Morley reforms. This also was done by Minto-Morley reforms. As we all know, Indians were allowed in legislative councils from 1861 for the first time in Viceroy's Executive Council. For the first time in Viceroy's Executive Council, an Indian was appointed, S.N. Sinha. Minto-Morley reforms for the first time appointed an Indian in Viceroy's Executive Council. Executive means executive body, legislature, you all know difference between legislature and executive. For the first time in Viceroy's Executive Council, Satyendranath Sinha, an Indian got appointed, that's called Satyendranath Sinha, to Viceroy's Executive Council. So, separate electorates were introduced. Separate electorates were introduced. Indian got elected to appointed to Viceroy's Executive Council, Satyendranath Sinha. Property restriction was more to Hindus, less to Muslims. And there was an expansion of Imperial Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Councils. Imperial Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Councils were further expanded. Imperial Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Councils were further expanded. Non-official majority was introduced. Non-official majority means Indians are majority now, but unfortunately most of the Indians are nominated but not elected. Though Indians are majority now in provinces, most of the Indians are nominated but not elected. So British supremacy continued. Though Indians are majority, most of them are nominated but not elected. So British superiority continued. Indians are still inferior, even though we have come up to 1909 Minto-Morley reforms. Indians were not allowed to participate in the administration, and they were not allowed to have any proper decision making in the administration. This is 1909 Minto-Morley reforms. Nobody believed in these reforms. Nobody believed in these reforms. INC condemned because it introduced separate electorates. INC condemned it because it introduced separate electorates. The system of election that was existed was too indirect. The system of election that was existed was too indirect, and Indians were not satisfied with this type of participation. And Indians were not satisfied with this type of participation. And at that time, Indians are expecting universal primary education and better policies for Indians, but they were not successful. So Minto-Morley reforms failed to appease majority of Indians, though for certain sections it introduced separate electorates. After Minto-Morley reforms, you all know, many events happened in India, particularly First World War internationally, and then Home Rule movement, Mahatma Gandhi coming into 1904, in 1915, and then moderates extremists reunion, Lucknow Pact between INC and Muslim League, Lucknow Pact between INC and Muslim League, Rowlatt Act, Hunter Commission, Rowlatt Act, Hunter Commission, that is Jallianwala Bagh incident. All these things happened, and in 1917, there is a very famous statement, Montag-Chelmsford reforms, also called as Montag statement. You can call it as Chelmsford reforms also. Progressive realization of responsible government. Progressive realization of responsible government. Gradual development of self-governing institutions. Progressive realization of responsible government. Gradual development of self-governing institutions, and increasing participation of Indians in every form of administration. 1917 statement, to make all the Indians to participate in the First World War, to support the British government in the First World War, to make the Indians to support in the First World War, to get their support in the First World War. A statement was given in 1917. Progressive realization of responsible government, gradual development of self-governing institutions. Progressive realization of responsible government, gradual development of self-governing institutions, increasing the participation of Indians, increasing the participation of Indians in every form of administration is the objective of future British India, is the objective of future British administration in India. This is 1917 famous statement. And the war ended. The war ended. Montag-Chelmsford reforms, also called as Government of India Act 1919. Montag-Chelmsford reforms, also called as Government of India Act 1919 came. The act came as an eyewash. It came as an eyewash, in the sense they promised gradual development of self-governing institutions, increasing the participation of Indians and responsible government. So they want to make an eyewash. For the first time, diarchy, D-Y-A-R-C-H-Y or D-I-A-R-C-H-Y, diarchy was introduced, not in the central level but in the provincial level. For the first time, diarchy was introduced in the provincial level. Okay, diarchy means dual rule. There are certain subjects which were reserved. There are certain subjects which were transferred. In the administration, there will be important subjects, unimportant subjects. Important subjects like police, revenue, all these things are retained by British administration. Unimportant subjects like primary education, public health, all these things were given to Indians. So those things which are very crucial and can control, the things which can control all other parts, they are retained by the Britishers. They are called reserved subjects. Those things which are very weak are transferred. It's called reserved subjects and transferred subjects. They are called reserved subjects and transferred subjects. Okay, and then the two in the provinces, not at the central level. They were introduced in the provincial level, not at the central level. Diarchy means rule of the two. Diarchy means rule of the two, reserved subjects and transfer subjects. The ministers were to be responsible to the legislature. The ministers were to be responsible to the legislature in the provinces. And no conference motion is allowed. And no conference motion is allowed. And one more point, crucial point. In case of failure of constitutional machinery in the state, even the transferred subjects will go to governor. even the transfer subjects will also go to the governor. Means governor, if the governor says there is a failure of constitutional machinery, the transfer subjects will also become reserved and everything will be administered according to the wishes of the governor. Okay, and governor have veto powers. He can, even in the transfer subjects, governor can stop any bill. So one thing, constitutional machinery, if it fails, then the transfer will go to reserved, and governor have veto powers. That means governor can stop any bill. So in a way, even in the transfer subjects, we are not independent. Even in the transfer subjects, we are not independent. This was the scenario. This was the scenario. And legislative councils further expanded. Legislative councils further expanded. Bicameral legislature was introduced in the provinces. Bicameral, having two houses. In Government of India Act 1919, bicameral legislature in the provinces. Bicameral legislature total in the strength in the central level also is Government of India Act 1935. Government of India Act 1919 is bicameral legislature was first time introduced in the provinces. Government of India Act 1919, very important prelims question. Generally we write 1935, no, 1919. Government of India Act 1919, first time bicameral legislature was introduced in the central also, provinces also. Strengthened in the central in the next time. So first time bicameral legislature, if the question was asked in the local level, in the central level, an idea was mooted in Government of India Act 1919. You have to star mark question for prelims. So central government. So what all I have discussed is about provincial. The central government, that is the imperial government, is still not responsible. It is not responsible government at all. It is not at all responsible. And first time an idea of public service commission was mooted. In Government of India Act 1919, first time an idea of public service commission was come into existence. The idea of public service commission was mooted. But public service commissions became statutory bodies not in Government of India Act 1919, but Government of India Act 1935. Remember this. Public Service Commission's idea came in Government of India Act 1919, but Public Service Commission statutory status came with Government of India Act 1935. This is also important question. Okay, here, bicameral at the central level, the Council of States tenure is 5 years and Central Legislative Assembly tenure is 3 years. There are two houses, Council of States, the tenure is 5 years, and the Central Legislative Assembly, the tenure is 3 years. Council of States, the tenure is 5 years, and the Central Legislative Assembly, the tenure is 3 years. And supplementary questions can be asked. Questions can be asked, supplementary questions can be asked. Budget can be discussed. Budget can be discussed. A part of budget can be voted. Budget can be discussed, a part of budget can be voted. But even then, even by 1919, percent of the budget cannot be voted. Even by 1919, 75% of the budget cannot be voted. So, questions can be asked and supplementary questions can be asked. Budget can be discussed, a part of budget can be voted, but 75% of the budget even then cannot be voted. 75% of the budget even then cannot be voted. This is Government of India Act 1995, and everybody criticized. The reason is diarchy is an eyewash. The transfer subjects are unimportant subjects. No responsible government, even in the provinces at the central level. No responsible government, and even then full budget cannot be done. And the popular ministers in the provinces can be completely controlled by the governor, and governor have ordinance powers. All these things made the Government of India 1919 reforms or Montague-Chelmsford reforms just an eyewash and not the true sense of a responsible government. And in the act it was told that after 10 years there will be a committee to examine whether the Government of India reforms 1919 or Montague Chelmsford reforms 1919 are functioning properly or not, or whether further reforms are needed or not, all these things to check it, there will be a committee after 10 years. And the committee came much earlier, 2 years much earlier, that's called Simon Commission, and Simon Commission gave a big report suggesting reforms, and based on Simon Commission reforms, many discussions were conducted, first round table conference, second round table conference, third round table conference, and finally, Government of India Act 1935 was made. The most probable question in all the exams, the most probable topic in all the exams, prelims, mains, optionals, everywhere is Government of India Act 1935. Every year in one option or the other, in prelims or mains, you get at least one question in Government of India Act 1935. Okay, Government of India Act 1935. Till Government of India Act 1935, until Government of India Act 1935, the Indian setup was acted in the unitary system. It acted in the unitary system. For the first time through Government of India Act 1935, the idea of all India Federation was mooted. For the first time through Government of India Act 1935, the idea of all India Federation was mooted. British India provinces and princely states, those who want to join, it is not mandatory on the part of the princely states to join. If they want to join, they can join. If they want to join, they can join. For the first time, the idea of all India Federation was mooted. An instrument of accession can be signed by the princely states with the British government so that they can join this All India Federation. An instrument of accession was signed by British government so that they can join in the, by the princely states so that they can join in the British India administration. That is called All India Federation idea. First time federation idea came into existence with Government of India Act 1935. For the first time, the idea of federation came into existence with Government of India Act 1935. And diarchy, dual rule in the provinces, which was introduced in Montague Chelmsford reforms, was removed, was abolished. Diarchy, 10 minutes back, which we have discussed, which was introduced in Montague Chelmsford reforms, was removed. It was removed, abolished in the provinces. Diarchy was abolished in the provinces. And provincial autonomy was guaranteed. Provinces got lot of autonomy, because when I told India for the first time shifted into federal model in Government of India Act 1935, unless the unit autonomy is maintained, unless the provincial autonomy is maintained, federal setup will not work well. Federal setup will not work well. So, provincial autonomy was guaranteed in Government of India Act 1935. And the diarchy, which was removed in the provinces by Government of India Act 1935, it was introduced in the central level. It was introduced in the central level. Remember, diarchy was removed in the provinces by Government of India Act 1935, and then provincial autonomy was guaranteed. And now, by Government of India Act 1935, diarchy was introduced at the central level. Diarchy was introduced at the central level. And an idea of federal railway authority was mooted. An idea of constituting a federal railway authority was instituted. Already RBI Act was passed in 1934. An idea of creating a strong central bank was also discussed in Government of India Act 1935. So, an idea about RBI was also discussed in Government of India Act 1935. And then, for the first time, same in the model like our Supreme Court, a federal court was constituted. An idea of federal court was initiated. Same as our Supreme Court have original jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction, all these jurisdictions, federal court also came into 4 with Government of India Act 1935. Original jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction, including advisory jurisdiction, an idea of federal court, like the present model Supreme Court was mooted out. And emergency provisions. The present model of emergency provisions were created by Government of India Act 1935. The present model in which we have emergency provisions in our constitution were mooted by Government of India Act 1935. Lists. List means union list, state list, that is federal list, provincial list and concurrent list. Federal list, provincial list and concurrent list also came into 4 with Government of India Act 1935. And remember a point, the Government of India Act 1935 is the lengthiest document which India has seen before its independence. In all the documents which Indian setup has seen before independence, Government of India Act 1935 is the lengthiest document consisting of 321 sections and 10 schedules. Consisting of 321 sections and 10 schedules. And the most probable prelims question, it's a traditional prelims question, the act which starts without a preamble is Government of India Act 1935. Star mark question for prelims which was asked already, the act which starts without a preamble is Government of India Act 1935. The act which starts without a preamble is Government of India Act 1935. So 321 sections, 10 schedules, starts without a preamble, All India Federation, diarchy was introduced at the central level, diarchy was abolished at the provincial level, diarchy was abolished at the provincial level, provincial autonomy was guaranteed, bicameral legislatures were strengthened, expansion of legislatures, federal court was mooted, Reserve Bank was strengthened, the ideas of Reserve Bank, All India Federal Railway Authority was mooted, and finally there was a question in mains long back in IGP and polity. The question is, the Government of India Act 1935 is an ambitious document which have never seen the light. Discuss. It is an ambitious document which have never seen the light. Discuss. Means many things were initiated, many ideas were mooted. The idea of All India Federation, the idea of All India Federal Railway Authority, most of the important ideas in Government of India Act 1935 never came into reality. So they have not seen light. Only ambitious document. It's an ambitious document. But fortunately, I can say the Government of India Act 1935 is the foundation on which the entire Indian Constitution was built. The Government of India Act 1935 is the foundation on which the entire Indian Constitution is built. Such a great document, lengthiest document. Remember, very important question for prelims and mains. Complete. In polity, political science, everywhere. Here, under the Government of India Act 1935, in 1937 elections were conducted. In 1937 elections were conducted and INC participated. INC participated and won in many provinces. And 1939 Second World War started. 1940 August offer by Lord Linlithgow. 1940 August offer by Lord Linlithgow offered for the first time dominion status. Offered for the first time dominion status. And also said after the end of the war, a constituent assembly will be constituted mainly consisting of Indians. After the end of the war, a constituent assembly will be constituted mainly consisting of Indians. In 1942 Cripps Mission, the same proposal, dominion status. In 1942 Cripps Mission, the same proposal, dominion status, but also offered that after the end of the war, A constituent assembly will be constituted solely consisting of Indians. All the members in the constituent assembly are Indians. That is Cripps mission. In 1945 Wavell plan, except Viceroy, Commander-in-Chief posts, all other posts will be given to Indians. 1945 Wavell plan, also called as radio plan. 1946 Cabinet mission plan. 1946 Cabinet mission plan. Pethick Lawrence, Alexander and Sir Stafford Cripps came. They want to make India into three groups: Group A, Group B and Group C. Group A is present India, Group B is present Pakistan, Group C is present Bangladesh. They want to have a common center for telecommunications, finance, external affairs, etc. And each group will be autonomous. This cabinet mission plan also failed. Then finally came Mountbatten and Indian Independence Act was passed. Indian Independence Act 1947, very crucial for exam. Indian Independence Act 1947. The Act provided two dominions, two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. Indian Independence Act 1947 created two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. Each dominion will have its own Governor General appointed by the King. Each dominion will have its own Governor General appointed by the King. Till the new constitution come into picture, till the new constitution come into force, the government of India will be ruled by Government of India Act 1935. Till the new constitution comes into force, the government of India will be ruled by Government of India Act 1935. And after August 15th, 1947, the British government will not have any control on Government of India. After August 15th, 1947, the British government will not have any control over on Government of India. The post of Secretary of the State of India is abolished. As I told you, it was created in 1858. The post of Secretary of State in India is abolished. And this post will be replaced by Secretary to the Commonwealth of Nations. As you all know, Commonwealth of Nations is British and its former colonies are called Commonwealth countries. The post of Secretary of State India was abolished and it was replaced by Secretary of Commonwealth of Nations. The Indian Independence Act 1947 proclaims the lapse of British paramountcy in India. The Government of India Act 1947 proclaims the lapse of British paramountcy over India. Okay, and British rule in India came to an end on August 15, 1947. And then, as you all know, December 9th, 1946, our first meeting of Constituent Assembly took place. Our Constituent Assembly drafted the Constitution for us, and this Constitution came into force on January 26, 1950, and we have adopted the Constitution on November 26th. Yesterday is November 26th, that is Constitution Adoption Day. Yesterday is November 26th, that is Constitution Adoption Day. This is the constitutional history of India, how our Constitution got created. Okay, done. Just go through your notes.